always been skeptical of the supernatural. Ghost stories and urban legends were nothing more than entertainment to her, amusing distractions for those who craved mystery in their mundane lives. But everything changed on a quiet autumn night when she heard her own voice whispering back to her through the phone, saying things she never said. It started with a simple mistake. She had just returned home from her evening classes at university, exhausted, and dropped onto her bed without even changing out of her hoodie and jeans. The apartment was silent except for the occasional hum of cars passing by outside. It was a small place, just a studio with a kitchenette, a bathroom, and a single window that overlooked the dimly lit street below. She lived alone, and she liked it that way. She picked up her phone, scrolling absent-mindedly through messages and emails before dialing her best friend, Rachel. The line rang once, twice, then a static-laced click, and then Emily heard her own voice. At first, she thought it was an echo, some kind of technical glitch. But the longer she listened, the more she realized something was wrong. The voice was distorted, like a recording played back at the wrong speed, lagging slightly behind her own words. She ended the call abruptly, staring at her phone. Her reflection in the darkened screen seemed unfamiliar for a moment, eyes slightly too hollow, mouth curved in an almost smile that she wasn't making. Shaking off the unease, she rationalized it as a network error, a ghost call. Nothing to worry about. But the next night it happened again. She called Rachel out of habit while making tea, the warmth of the cup in her hands a comfort against the cold creeping into her bones. But when the call connected, she heard her own voice once more. Only this time, it spoke first. Emily. Her name, drawn out in a whisper. She hadn't said anything yet. A chill slid down her spine. She hung up immediately. For the next few days, she avoided making calls altogether. But it didn't stop. The calls would come at odd hours, 1:43 a.m., 3:07 a.m., always in the dead of night. When she answered, she would hear herself breathing on the other end, a perfect mimicry of her own breath. Then came the whispers. Not full sentences, not at first, just fragments of speech, as if overheard from a conversation she had never had. A word here, a sigh there. Then, one night, a complete sentence. Don't go outside. Emily's hands trembled as she dropped the phone onto her bed. She hadn't said that, but the voice had been hers. Identical. Something was terribly wrong. Yet, against all logic, part of her felt drawn to it. A deep, irrational curiosity. If it was her own voice, was it trying to warn her? If so, warn her about what? She stared at the phone, waiting. But the line had gone silent. The apartment suddenly felt smaller, the air heavier. The lone window in the room reflected only darkness. And for the first time in years, Emily pulled the curtains shut. She told herself it was nothing, a prank, a mistake. But she knew deep down that something was listening, and it was waiting. Emily tried to ignore the voice. She deleted her call history, turned off notifications, even left her phone on silent. But it didn't matter. The calls kept coming. No number, no caller ID, just the same distorted whisper on the other end. And the messages started. They weren't texts. Her phone never showed a notification. But when she checked her voice recordings, there they were. Short, garbled clips of her own voice, speaking in that same unnatural way. At first, they were just variations of her name. A hushed Emily in the dark. Sometimes stretched out, sometimes abrupt, always wrong. Then they became something more. Don't open the door. Don't look outside. outside. It's getting closer. She would have thought someone was playing a cruel joke if it weren't for the fact that her phone had never been out of her sight. No one else had access to it, and no matter how many times she deleted the recordings, new ones would appear. One night, she found one that lasted longer than usual, 1 minute and 12 seconds. Heart hammering, she pressed play. Silence at first, then the unmistakable sound of her own breathing, slow and steady. A small rustling as if someone or something was shifting in the dark. Then a whisper. It knows you hear it. Emily clamped a hand over her mouth. Her own voice was barely audible, as if she were crouching in a corner, whispering to herself. Then the breathing on the recording changed. It wasn't hers anymore. It was deeper, wrong. Something else was breathing in sync with her. The recording cut off abruptly. Emily sat frozen, phone slipping from her fingers. She didn't dare move. For the first time since this nightmare began, she truly felt like she wasn't alone. She started seeing things. Or maybe things started seeing her. At night, shadows lingered too long in the corners of her apartment. The air felt thick, suffocating. Her reflection in the bathroom mirror would hold eye contact a second too long before turning away. And the calls kept coming. But now, the voice was changing. The whispers were still hers, still identical. But there was something else underneath, something layered, as if something else was trying to speak through her voice. It would start with a soft warning, don't move. And then, don't look at it. Emily would clamp her hands over her ears, refusing to listen. But the words weren't just on the phone anymore. She could hear them in her head. One night, she woke up to the sound of static. Her phone was on her nightstand, the screen glowing dimly in the dark. A call was coming through, but the phone wasn't ringing. It was already connected. She reached for it with shaking hands. The call timer was running. 0042, 0043, 0044. She hadn't answered it, but she was on the line. The whisper came through, softer than ever. Emily. Her blood turned to ice. Something about this time felt final. The whispering continued, her own voice overlapping, distorting. But beneath it, something else was breathing. Something too large, too deep. Then, for the first time, the voice asked her a question. Do you see me? Emily's breath caught in her throat. She squeezed her eyes shut. Number no. She didn't see anything. She refused. The call continued. A soft, rustling noise, like fabric dragging across the floor, like something moving closer. Then, a quiet chuckle. Her own voice, laughing. She dropped the phone. The laughter didn't stop. She wasn't holding the phone anymore, but she could still hear it, growing louder, more distorted. She grabbed the device and, with shaking fingers, ended the call. Silence. She curled into herself, pressing her back against the wall. She didn't sleep for the rest of the night, but as the first light of dawn crept through the curtains, she noticed something. The phone was still glowing. A new recording had appeared. Only one word was on it. Soon, Emily stopped leaving her apartment. The warnings, the whispers, the way her own voice mocked her. It had drained her. She barely ate, barely slept. But no matter how hard she tried to block it out, something else was shifting. The voice was no longer just on the phone. She could hear it outside. One night, as she lay in bed, heart pounding against her ribs, she heard it from the hallway. A soft, familiar whisper. Emily. Her breath caught. It was coming from behind the front door. Slow, deliberate knocks followed. Not forceful, not hurried, just steady, patient. She pressed both hands over her ears. The knocking stopped, but then a quiet giggle from right outside. It was her laugh. She stayed like that until morning. The next day, she knew she had to get out. She packed a bag, grabbed her keys, and stepped toward the door. But before she could unlock it, she felt something. A presence. Something waiting. She reached for the knob, but her fingers hesitated. And then, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message, not a recording this time. Not a call. Just 3 words. "It's behind you." Emily turned. Nothing was there, but her own reflection in the dark screen of the TV. It was smiling. Emily couldn't move. Her reflection in the TV screen held her gaze. Its lips curved into a slow, knowing smile. It was wrong. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't moving. And yet, the other her stood there, grinning, watching. Her body locked up, every muscle frozen with dread. She forced herself to take a step back, her foot catching against the edge of the rug. The reflection's smile widened as if amused. The room felt wrong. The air had thickened, pressing against her like something unseen was wrapping itself around her. Then, the TV flickered, a flash of static, and her reflection was gone. Not replaced, not distorted, just gone. The screen showed only her apartment, an empty space where she should have been. The weight of the silence crushed her. Her ears rang with it. The phone buzzed in her hand, but she couldn't look away from the screen. Then the reflection returned, not on the TV, but in the window. Emily saw her own face in the darkened glass, except she was standing outside, her duplicate wrapped in the same hoodie, the same jeans, the same wide-eyed terror frozen on her face. Except it wasn't frozen anymore. It was moving. The reflection tilted its head, its eyes dark, mouth stretching just slightly too wide. Emily took a step back. The reflection stepped forward. Her phone vibrated violently in her hand. The screen lit up with an incoming call. Unknown caller. Her breath hitched. She wasn't going to answer. Not this time. She turned the phone off. She ran to the door, unlocking it in one frantic motion, yanking it open, and stopped. The hallway was gone. Or rather, it was there, but wrong. It stretched endlessly, the dim yellow light flickering as the walls seemed to warp and breathe. And at the far end of the corridor stood someone. Emily's stomach dropped. It was her, not the reflection, not the distorted face in the screen. A perfect copy of herself, standing at the end of the impossible hallway. And it was smiling. The phone in her hand, despite being off, buzzed one final time. A voice whispered directly into her ear. "You shouldn't have looked." The light flickered, and Emily's double took a step forward. Emily ran. She didn't know where. There was nowhere to go. The hallway stretched and bent, its walls shifting, doorways appearing and disappearing, like something was rewriting reality around her. But she ran anyway. Her heartbeat pounded in her ears, but behind it, she could hear another set of footsteps. Her own, matching her pace. Never too fast, never too slow. Like the thing chasing her didn't need to hurry. Like it knew she had nowhere to go. She turned a corner. Another impossible stretch of doors, identical and endless. She grabbed the closest one, wrenched it open, and stumbled inside. Darkness swallowed her whole. The door slammed shut behind her. Silence. She pressed herself against the wood, chest heaving, trying to listen. The footsteps had stopped. Had it given up? Number no, she could still feel it. Still hear it. Breathing. Not behind the door. Not in the hallway. Inside the room. With her. Emily squeezed her eyes shut. The air was thick with something foul, something ancient. The darkness wasn't just an absence of light. It was alive, shifting and watching. And then, a whisper, right next to her ear. "I've been waiting," she screamed. Light exploded around her. Emily's eyes snapped open. She was back. Her apartment. The TV off. The windows showing only the street below. Her phone lying, silent, on the nightstand. For a long time, she didn't move. She barely breathed. Had it been a dream? A hallucination? She checked her phone. No missed calls. No recordings. Nothing. The silence felt unfamiliar, unnatural, hollow. Shakily, she got up, moving to the bathroom. She needed to see herself. She needed to make sure. She stood in front of the mirror. Her face stared back. Same tired eyes. Same pale skin. It was her. But something still felt wrong. She touched her reflection, fingers pressing against the cold glass. The moment her skin met the surface, her phone buzzed. She stiffened. Slowly, she turned to look at the screen. One new recording. 0012 seconds. Emily didn't press play. She didn't need to. Because as she stood there, the last whisper curled around her like a breath in the dark. Her own voice. "See you soon."